Good morning and welcome back to AI Ramblings, hosted by my colleague Neal Makwana here and me, Michael Parekh, here on episode 10 of our show. We have a good array of things to talk about, Neal, today. Lots of good stuff going on going into the July 4th holidays, beginning of the second half of the year. And I think we have a couple of fun things that will tickle people's fancy depending on what their perspective is and a lot of the things that are going on. I think there was a lot of stuff that happened this week, news of the week in terms of our first feature. And I think each of us have one each that we want to talk about a little bit as kind of a framework thing. And Neal, I think you have a good one. Why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, so I guess our first piece here comes from the information. They're reporting that OpenAI looks to be venturing into the productivity space, potentially launching their first AI native productivity suite, which they kind of hope to fundamentally change collaboration and document creation. Kind of the battleground as it is right now is very segmented, as not segmented, but fragmented, as we know. There's a lot of companies doing different things, but it's hard to operate within different platforms. The companies like Microsoft have Office 365 and Google has Drive, Docs, Sheets, and Slides. But it's hard to get one model such as OpenAI's Chat GPT to interface with these external things just because obviously all these companies are wanting to silo it off just to their users and their models. So it's an interesting read just because it breaks down kind of the current landscape that we live in, but also a couple of trends that we are seeing with even companies like Salesforce locking down their data in Slack, not allowing AI such as Glean, which I know you have written about in the past. Link it down below in the show notes, but preventing external third-party services and AI models to access the information, which in turn could limit some user flexibility and innovation down the line. So, as we know, there's a growing demand for this idea of like meta chatbots, not meta the company, but meta obviously meta the company, as well as we'll discuss in a bit, are making big waves in this. But in this case, by meta chatbots, I mean chatbots that can connect and transfer context across multiple platforms, potentially being able to create new user experiences and eventually, obviously, business models down the road. It's a good piece. We'll link it down below, and it's just a good shift in the landscape.
It's interesting how meta has now become something that basically has obscured the meaning of the real word meta. So
yes,
metadata, it's not meta's data, it's metadata. Okay.
exactly.
But I think you touch on a very key point here, which is OpenAI has all but signaled that they were going to go this way when they hired Fidji Simon, who is the board member and CEO of Instacart, as their new CEO of applications, working with Sam, and basically signaling that they've got a whole array of applications planned in box 6 of our AI tech stack that we've talked about. And we just did a refresh video on it as well. And I wrote about the CEO of applications piece, which we'll also put in the show notes. But OpenAI has just vast ambitions to not only have world-class compute infrastructure on which they can launch all of these chatbots, next generation, and then lots of services. They also obviously want to be in AI search, which they've signaled a long time ago, and they're going to be competing head on with Google, with Gemini search, et cetera, and others, Perplexity, et cetera. So the applications thing is something that we need to put a pin on, and we're going to see a lot of activity, especially AI fused into these productivity apps. And again, the question also then, the ball also is in Apple's court in terms of what they're going to do for their productivity suite, because they have a fairly robust set of applications on the consumer side. Google, for its part, is going to be absolutely fusing Gemini into all the productivity apps that they've got. And all of this competes with Microsoft's Office 365. And that works for Microsoft as long as they remain a partner of OpenAI. But increasingly, those two are at loggerheads on their agreement. And there's a lot of discussion and coverage on that. I've written a couple of pieces. We'll again put it in the show notes. But the other question is, as OpenAI starts to find its own voice and own way, independent of Microsoft, their productivity apps don't necessarily need to be hooked hand in hand with Office 365 from Microsoft. So they're also likely to be competing with Microsoft than not. So that's another dynamic to watch on this AI chessboard going into the second half. So great news of the week to focus on. My news of the week would be something that kind of extends this, which is that OpenAI is going to need a huge amount of compute to serve customers. They already have 500 million users of ChatGPT, and presumably they'll have billions in the next couple of years. And so they need compute. Right now, their compute provider of choice and by their contract is Microsoft Azure. But of late, they've been charting their own course as well, building their own data centers in Texas with partner SoftBank called Stargate. Oracle is a big partner. And one of the biggest shortages in the AI industry is obviously GPUs. And OpenAI uses NVIDIA GPUs, which come through Microsoft. But the news of the week for me was that Google announced that they got OpenAI to commit to using their TPUs, their tensor processing units, which are very unique competition to NVIDIA. Google has been making these for a long time at scale directly through TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor, which makes a huge amount of chips for the whole industry, about 80-90% of it. And Google, for them to get an outside LLM to be using their TPUs is a big win for them. It's a dent in the force, as it were, of the NVIDIA position on GPUs. It doesn't shrink it dramatically, but it's an important signal. And I also had a big post on this, which we'll put in the show notes. But again, this is a very strategic thing that's going on that people need to be thoughtful about. And I thought it was a very interesting news of the week thing. Those would be our two picks. There's a lot, again, both of them presage a lot of things that are yet to come from these big companies that'll affect the industry. But our main topic of the week is something that I'm sure all our listeners know that's been going on, which is Meta, specifically founder CEO Mark Zuckerberg, has decided that his leading position in open source Llama is not good enough for what he wants to do with AI and the $70+ billion a year he's spending on AI capex to build huge amounts of compute. And he wants to shake things up and build faster a team that can deliver not AGI, artificial general intelligence, but super intelligence, or ASI, artificial super intelligence. And so in that context, we talked a couple of shows ago how he essentially did an acqui-hire of Scale AI and got 28-year-old Alexander Wang to be now the head of AI for Meta. They also got Nat Friedman, who's of GitHub fame, who's going to be co-leading that effort. And then, open up the checkbook. And, if you read the headlines, you might think you're looking at the sport pages, $100 million signing bonuses, $300 million pay packages over a number of years. And these are for AI researchers. They've hired already over a dozen or so of top AI researchers from OpenAI, Anthropic, from a number of other places. And we'll have notes on all of these people and what their claim to fame is, etc. And these, this is the big talent rush to resets the table stakes for AI at this mid-year point in 2025. We already had the last year with every major Mag 7 company say, okay, we're all in, we're going to put 40, 50, 60 billion dollars, whatever it takes to build the data centers of the future, and continue that for years to scale AI. Now, the other major shortage point, which is people, is the big land rush, and Meta has kind of kicked it off. And the reason I bring it up as a topic of the week is that it literally resets a lot of the table for AI going into the second half and next year. Specifically, it means that the whole industry has to react differently, not just in the US, but globally. Half the AI researchers in the world are from China. I've written a lot about this. There's a big arbitrage in terms of what Chinese researchers get paid versus US. And that'll, probably narrow a little bit given some of the things that are going on. And the other thing is that payments are not just, they're obviously the headline ones are, very salacious and everyone wants to read about them and so on. And we'll have the links in the show notes. But recognize that it affects up and down the whole industry. So starting salaries for AI folks also get impacted by this. So it's not just the gazillions of dollars. This, for a while, will create a little bit of a windfall for a lot of people in AI, and things will have to be sorted out. And then investors will have to judge, both in the large stuff, medium stuff, and small stuff, if this was worth the effort. the last thing I'll say on this is from a Meta point of view, the numbers we're talking about for Meta to be spending these kinds of sums, pittance, right? Because they're already spending 50, 60, 70 billion a year on the CapEx side. So they've got the factories coming, they need apps to run on them, they need people to build the apps and so on. Then the other aspect is they've got cash flow of 50, 60, 70 billion dollars from their core businesses where they serve 3 billion people on Facebook and Meta and Instagram and so on, WhatsApp. So they have the resources. And then this week, Meta also announced that they were going to tap financial institutions for $30 billion in debt and equity. So they're going to be leveraging up, which, by the way, again, is a table stakes change for the industry because the other Mag 7s, the Googles and Microsofts, they have a lot of cash flow too, but they can also leverage their balance sheets from a debt point of view. Now, this is from a ex-Wall Street financial geek point of view because it has big implications for how investors look at these public companies a little bit in terms of how the stuff gets financed ahead of the payoff on all of these products. Because again, software takes a long time to build. You can't stand this stuff up in the next 6 to 12 months. So investors have to temper their expectations and say, oh, the payoff of all this stuff is going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And that is, that's easier said than done. It works fine when the market momentum is up into the right, etc. But we've got a lot of macro headwinds in the economy as well. Tariffs, trade, deficit issues, all the stuff that's going on the macro. And that will also cause some financial volatility. And I just bring this up in the context of, because this show, we talk about the technology on a bottom-up basis and what's affecting the stuff. But I wanted to bring the financial overlay because what Meta is doing also impacts all of that. So big topic. It's our main topic of the week. And I'm spending a lot of time on it and will be for the rest of the year. Neal,
Yeah,
it affects what you are, you're going out to San Francisco soon to
I
meet a bunch
am.
of companies and so on. Maybe talk a little bit about how your world is seeing some of this
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean, first off, I know you touched on it earlier, but I saw a really funny tweet that went viral the other day where someone was saying, I've been waiting for a long time for programmers to be treated in the same light as an athlete. I mean, this is like there's so many Twitter accounts that are reporting on trades, whether it's basketball, football, soccer, but now there's actually heavy tracking being done as to this person's left, Apple and gone to OpenAI or vice versa. I mean, there's so much movement right now with talent. We've seen it, coming for a while now with a lot of talent, shifting, leaving, starting their own things. But there's a lot of focus, of course, here on the best of the best being acquired from these companies. But I think from kind of the ground view that I'm at, it also allows people my age who are just starting off, who have experience in AI and machine learning and having a really good understanding of these complex models to leverage their understanding of it also as a potential way to get a pay bump. I mean, I know plenty of people that are my age working at a variety of companies in a software role who have experience in this, and I wouldn't blame them if they went to their manager and said, hey, I have a lot of experience in this, I think I can add something here. Is there any way that I can be reevaluated based on that? I mean, there's a lot of really interesting shifts happening right now in the landscape. I think I'm gonna, as you brought up, I'm gonna be going out to SF, in the coming week or so to see some friends and obviously also connect with a network of people we have there. And I'll have to come back and report on episode 11 as to how the temperature is over there right now.
It reminds me of the old movie. I wrote a post about a year ago. I'll link it up. Where there's a famous movie, Mrs. Robinson. There's a guy who puts his arm around a young man and says, "Son, I want you to focus on opportunities ahead, or just one word." And he says, it's plastics. You need to go into plastics. And today
Mm.
that word is AI. And it's been true for the last couple of years, but it just got a pedal to the metal in terms of what's been happening today with what Meta's doing. So anyway, so plastics, Neal.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
why don't we shift to our next topic, which is our read for the week. There's
Yes.
again a lot of good stuff here, and we got to focus on the good stuff to read, right, Neal? Not the AI slop that's accelerating.
Exactly. That's a great transition into my read of the week. It's an article from the Washington Post earlier this week, and it essentially outlines a variety of studies that were done, one being an MIT study, a UK study, and a Wharton study, with this idea of showing that frequent use of AI tools like ChatGPT are heavily affecting the brains of people of a variety of ages. The MIT study in specific showed that ChatGPT users showed lower brain engagement and produced less original essays than those using Google or no tech. And it kind of outlines this growing idea of cognitive offloading, where experts are warning that we're increasingly letting AI do a lot of thinking for us, kind of being able to just turn our brains off and send it off on a task. And it's growing this potential fear of how over reliance on AI could stifle creativity and make us, more susceptible, I guess, to just the output of these models rather than taking time to actually vet it and create our own responses. Then there's also the flip side of this that's been promised, that AI can also free up mental resources and help you allocate time to more ambitious or creative tasks that you would potentially need to do yourself. So it's this really interesting argument of what tasks are we giving to AI to do? Is it the mundane things, or is it things that are actually potentially replacing creative output that we could do ourselves? I mean, I'm going to talk about it in a minute here for my obsession of the week, but I recently started a Substack where my goal is just to tackle AI from a Gen Z perspective, but also talking about how design and product factors into all these spaces. And even when writing that, I mean, I haven't had to write something of that length since school. I feel like I'm always inputting information. I'm rarely outputting it, which was part of the motivation for starting this. But even when doing that, I wrote the entire thing on my own, and just for the hell of it, I was like, let me go ahead and paste this into ChatGPT and see what it says based on what I wrote. And the output it gave completely stifled any personality, any creativity that I had written had been completely just nulled. And it was very, very easy to tell that this had been essentially generated by an AI. So a lot of these things, obviously the models are getting better over time, and it'll only get more human like. Obviously we don't want to anthropomorphize it, as we've talked in the past, but there's this growing similarity to how some humans talk in a lot of these models. But I think in areas like public education, there needs to be a lot of thought put into how AI use is important to maximize our benefits, but also to try and minimize some risks of people, putting over reliance on them. But yeah, it's a great article that kind of details all these studies. As I said, there were two others, one done in the UK and one at Wharton. So I highly encourage check it out. It'll be in the show notes down below. But yeah, it's an interesting time we are in right now from a creative point of view, I guess.
No, with every technology, it's a double-edged sword. There's always going to be negative outcomes with anything, right? And so it's important for early adopters and then mainstream folks to be aware of this and do everything in moderation. That's generally, that old adage has been always my rule, whether it's eating, exercise, just do everything in moderation. And this is no different. The problem here is that almost everything we use in terms of media devices, vehicles, is just going to get totally flooded, at least for the next couple of years, with huge amounts of AI content, etc. And so our brains and our habits have to adjust to the cognitive impact of this. And so I think these studies are very important. We're going to see a lot better studies as this stuff really gets developed, etc. Easy solutions other than we as individuals have the ability to just moderate things. And by the way, the big tech companies are recognizing this, Apple putting lots of software features in terms of allowing you to focus, emit notifications, all of that stuff. These are all tools that will come in. It's just that most of these are default opt-in, and most people don't opt in because they're not inclined to look for some of these choices. I'm encouraged by your generation being, your generation today is healthier than prior generations, in terms of food, drink, taking care of themselves, etc. So I think given that your generation is native to this stuff, I'm optimistic that you guys are going to be able to manage way through better than this. Tougher for me, my sister, your mom, because we talk about this AI brain rot thing a fair bit, but it's a very important topic. And so good read of the week. My read of the week kind of leverages this point as well. I went back to a book that I've loved for a long time it's called It's called Time Travel, and it's a book by James Gleick, who has written amazing books on science and how it impacts society, etc. It was written almost 10 years ago, and the reason I bring it up is because I went back and reread it. I've reread it, probably at least twice, and this is my third time. And it's, you all know, when you go back and read some favorite books and then reread them a decade later, 2 decades later, in the today's world, it changes your perspective. And this is one of those books. Because what Gleick does in this book is really looks at the origin of the science around understanding time and quantum mechanics, etc. He starts the book in a very clever way with H.G. Wells, who was one of the first modern sci-fi writers to literally talk about how time travel would work, theorize. This is the late 1800s. And a lot of what he wrote, and it really impacted the world back then. People were agog over this notion that, oh, there could be a time machine, we could travel, all science fiction. And today, you have that with lots of science fiction shows and books and so on, Terminator being one of them, in terms of going back in time and doing all this damage and so on, which, by the way, ironically, is one of the core sets of fears for AI, in terms of the doomerism, etc., because it's affected even at the core. The scientists today, AI scientists like Ilya Sutskever, whose companies safe super intelligence, that this quantum stuff, this time travel stuff, this science fiction stuff is negative. And I bring the book up because if you read it again today and think about it in the context of what we're doing in AI, almost like, or somebody needs to rewrite do another book in the world of AI. And I just had a marvelous time over the weekend, just kind of actually writing out how I would do a reaction to the book Time Travel to this. So that's been my book of the week. I will also tie it a little bit to my book of the week last week, which was The Thinking Machine by Stephen Witt, the last chapter of which, where he's interviewing Jensen Huang. That book is about NVIDIA and Jensen Huang, and again, very highly recommended. But Jensen, in the last chapter, rails against science sci-fi, basically influencing how we think about AI. And I loved it at that time because there are very few founder CEOs who are talking about it in that practical way, that this technology is on a bottom-up, basis, very different than what we dream about in sci-fi. And it's important to keep the two separate, even though sci-fi can inspire us to do so many things. Just like the time travel, G. Wells stuff inspired people like Einstein and a whole bunch of physicists in the early 1900s to rethink time and quantum mechanics and so on, and come up with the real science that helps our understanding of the universe in a much different way. So use everything in moderation again. Science fiction, same thing, whether it's books, movies, etc., but see how it applies to the real world and take it and bring that in balance. So that's my book of the week. Why don't we wrap it up with our obsession of the week? And here I got to give a little bit of an intro to my dear nephew Neal, who everyone, I know your days are filled, etc., but I would recommend. Neal has a wonderful Substack. It's his first post. He talks about AI browsers and AI is eating GUIs, and I don't want to take any of his thunder, but it's a great post. I read a lot of stuff online, etc., and I'm not saying this. I would say this even if we weren't related, Neal. For a first post of on a Substack, etc., this one is very thoughtfully written, and I said it on Twitter,
Thank
etc.
you.
I would highly recommend everyone check it out. We'll have the link. Subscribe to Neal's Substack. It's free. With that, Neal, tell us about your obsession. This
Yeah.
took more than a week, so
Yeah,
give
it
us
did.
a sense.
It was a long time coming. Yeah, so I guess just to preface it, as I mentioned a bit earlier, I've been doing a lot of thinking on this space, especially through the vector of AI browsers and kind of how I think this is the next big wave and where all this tech is going. But the post that I wanted to make for this week for my first post is titled "AI is breaking the GUI graphical user interface" for anyone who may not be familiar. And essentially, it's a little piece I wrote that discusses how natural language is eating at the interface as we know. So obviously, for as long as, at least for people my age, have known, the interfaces that we've interacted with on our computers have remained mostly the same. Stuff like apps, windows, documents, menus. And it's a solution that worked for a really long time. But I kind of discuss how I believe that AI is breaking this, and the fact that we're kind of in a weird transition period right now with interfaces like ChatGPT, which, as we've discussed on the show before, kind of makes us revert back to this terminal like interface for inputting commands into a box and waiting for outputs. And I essentially talk about how this feels like we're in interface limbo, essentially, where everything is kind of held up together by duct tape. We're in this weird spot where old frameworks like apps, files, and Windows don't really feel like they fit, but there is really nothing new yet that's arrived to take its place. The metaphor I give is kind of like if you give a kid a box of crayons, but you only let them color inside of a printed off sheet of someone else's lines. I think people are kind of ready to be given a blank page where they can express themselves because now we've been given the tools where we can use things like natural language and our voices, not having to manipulate it for SEO or for a search bar to get what we want, but we can kind of speak the way we've always wanted to speak. So I'll let everyone take a look at it. But one of the main reasons I bring it up is for a topic that we've discussed a couple of times is this idea of AI browsers. I've obviously done a lot of thinking on it, which is kind of what inspired this post. A lot of my exposure has been through the browser company's Dia browser, which launched, a couple weeks ago, and it kind of got me excited thinking about where this tech is going. Obviously, there's companies like Perplexity, which will be releasing Comet soon, hopefully for us to try out as well. But it's this really interesting shift in that we're going to have to rewire the way that we interact with a lot of these interfaces. And I believe it's more than just a chat box that we type commands into. So I definitely encourage everyone to go take a look at it, and more to come soon.
Terrific. I commend that obsession of the week, and it also kind of relates to my obsession of the week, which is, as many of you know, I'm a gadget freak, etc. And but at the same time, I'm constantly thinking about just the issues that we're talking about, which is how is AI going to change a lot of the things that we use, etc. When Johnny Ive and Sam Altman announced their merger, $6.5 billion merger, and we did a podcast on it, we'll put it in the show notes. We did some write up on it. But one of the things is they're promising a whole new gadget beyond the legacy gadgets of computers and smartphones. And so that'll be fun whenever that comes out. That's supposed to be later next year. They're shooting for 100 million plus units in starting in 27, and it's part of a family of gadgets. But while we wait for all that, I'm just curious about how our current gadgets are going to be useful for AI. So I went back to one of my fascinations, which are Google Chromebooks, which, if some of you geeks may remember, Google came out with a line of computers that they used to make. Now they get third parties like Lenovo to make. And this is the latest one, which is the Google Chromebook. It's actually Lenovo Chromebook Plus 14. Catchy name. It's about $600-700. It's got 16 gigs of RAM. It runs Chrome OS and it runs the latest Chrome. The reason it's important is it's basically a Gemini machine. Gemini is built in as you can, and you don't need to have this Chromebook. You can use other Chromebooks. You can use your Mac. You can use laptops. The reason I'm intrigued by this standalone device is that the idea is that this doesn't run, standalone applications that run on an OS like Mac OS or Windows. It runs off the web using progressive web applications, PWA, using MCP, etc. So it's interesting, and I've already tried out a lot of the Gemini stuff on this, and it runs super fast. It's a very accessible. The thing is only a little over 2 pounds. It's awesome. And so this has been my gadget obsession of the week because I love gadgets, but more importantly, understanding how the applications of Gemini and so on with voice, you can talk, and it launches different tabs and does all that stuff that we're talking about. That's kind of cool. The negative is I can't run the Dia browser on this because Dia only
Yes.
works on Mac and Windows. But this is, for now, a Google test machine from my point of view. So I just thought I'd
Wonderful.
highlight that. The one other thing I'll just say is Google has two platforms, right? Just like Apple has multiple platforms. Google has the Chrome OS, and browser, but they also have Android. And there's the world of Android tablets is also exploding in terms of AI type of applications. And there's a couple of new ones that are coming that I've also got coming into the pipeline. And that'll be one of my other obsessions of the week to come in later episodes. So Google, from a hardware software point of view, will also do future shows. We'll talk about Apple's iPads and Macs and so on in the context of AI applications from all these services. So very fun, exciting times. I hope you found this show of interest, and I hope you all are getting ready for July 4th, our 249th birthday. And I wish you all a wonderful holiday. And as usual, thank you all for joining us, and stay tuned.
See you next time. Thanks.